it goes. Good evening, lady and gentlemen. I'm gonna, yeah, it's 6 o'clock according to my phone here. Let me do one more thing, if I can find out where it was hidden. Oh, there it is. Get the projector up, because we're going to do a lot of basically inductive work tonight. Have to figure out what's going on here. All right. I think, let me see where if I sit here, am I still in the picture? I am, yes. And you will still be able to see the screen pretty well, I think. Okay. I want to apologize for not getting stuff up earlier than as early as I should have. But I do have the material for last week and this week up. There are no assignments due this week since I messed up. And the crazy thing happens when you mess up. You have to take the punishment for it. All right. I don't have the list, but I know you both, and I'm glad to have you in class tonight. We're going to be talking about legal literature, and there is I believe I set it up. We'll see. If not, I will get it set up. I have a nice handout with special vocabulary and explanation of the legal literature that we'll be looking at in Exodus 21. And I recognize you both. I can't even see from here. It's so bright. I look at the screen, it's just a dull spot. All right. Let's have a word of prayer. But before we do, let's talk briefly. I'll talk, you listen. How's that? Because I don't think you're going to be able to talk back. I'm concerned, as you ought to be, with the fact that we're going to have to go to all online classes for this course. I was thrilled when the two students that I had enrolled for this course were both on-campus students, because it meant we could sit and we could talk back and forth and ask questions. Over the break, I will try to work out some options to make that even more possible, make it something like that possible as we go along. I don't like it in Hebrew 1 and Hebrew 2 either, but at least in that case, I'm basically asking you to memorize a lot of stuff and become familiar with it. Here, I'm wanting you to be able to interact with the text and come up with ideas and see the implications of what you're looking at. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, so be in prayer about it. I'll be in prayer about it, and I'll be paying attention to what are the options we have and how things can be done. Are there any innovations that the guys in IT are going to try to bring along as we get into this really uncharted territory? We're for most of our courses, we're way ahead of the game because we've been doing this blended class all along. But I don't believe I've ever had a Hebrew reading student who wasn't in class with me. And it really is a challenge. So be prepared to send in all kinds of emails. I know that it's possible to set this up. I'll check with the guys in IT where you are watching and at the same time you can text in. The problem is that only works when I don't use the screen, which, by the way, notice. If you can see this, there's about a 7 to 10 second delay, so I got to get rid of that, or else it becomes an incredible distraction to you, and probably even worse to me. But anyway, that's That's the mindset I have, is that we're going to make it work because we have to, and we have a great God who can handle everything. What you'll be looking at for next week is Exodus chapter 21, and we'll go into it as far as we can tonight. We're just, and as I said, we're going to kind of work inductively. I'm going to assume I have students here who are really curious and don't see and understand things like they should. And so if I get a little too, what's the word I want? If I get a little too elementary, I apologize. But my tendency is to be the opposite, to take a little too much for granted. So I'm going to try to walk through this very slowly and help you to get prepared. Because in a sense, I know I'm getting you both back into the swing of reading Hebrew and of studying Hebrew after a pretty significant hiatus of a few weeks or maybe longer. All right. As I said, we need to pray, so let's do that. Oh, Father, there are so many opportunities that you give us. And right now, with all the changes that you've brought into this world through this coronavirus, it's easy for us to complain because things are different, because things are harder. But we know you know what you're doing, and that everything is going to work out as you intended to. Help us, Lord, to be in harmony with your work and at peace with the way you're doing things. Toward that end, Lord, I pray that you'll help both the students in this class and myself, and really all the students on this campus, or or I should say, out there as we go to all online in the next few weeks. Pray that it all will find this to be beneficial. I pray the students will find the self-discipline to be present in the class and to do the homework on time, even though they have options which can allow them to slide a little bit. In other words, Lord, I pray that instead of this becoming an opportunity for our students to lose ground, that the very struggle will make them better students and better servants of yours, more disciplined, more focused, better prepared to serve you in whatever you have for them in life. Now, toward that end tonight, Lord, help us to focus on your word and to learn, yes, Hebrew, to learn Hebrew grammar, syntax, the structure of legal literature. But above all, Lord, give us a sense of how precious it is to have direct access to your word, as it were, holding on to an electric wire while standing in a puddle. We have the very power of your word in our hands, and help us never to take it for granted. Now be honored and glorified in the hours we spend in this class tonight, Lord, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I should mention, I think at least one of you is on the road now traveling, so I don't think you're watching at the moment, but I assume and I trust and I pray that you arrive safely at your destination. And I don't know whether you all will come back to campus. Some students have decided just to work from home and finish their work there. I will say this, if that is your plan, make it a plan. Don't just assume that it'll all work out. Establish times. If you've been homeschooled, you already know this. You can't do a school or learn anything by saying, I'll get around to it. Eventually, you get lost and way behind, and then there's no catching up. The courses will go on every semester, every class, just as they are now. Every week at this time, I will record. Lord willing, I'll be recording from here. If so far I have not encountered anybody who has the coronavirus, and although I've kidded people, when somebody says, how are you feeling? I always say, well, I'm doing just great, except for that little cough and tightness in my chest and that minor temperature. I'm doing just well. But I know that this is not something really that's funny. It's a scary thing. People are dying, and presumably more people will die. And so I'm going to pray that you don't become ill, and I appreciate if you pray that I don't become ill, because, well, I'm not really afraid of this, and I don't think we should be as Christians, because, I mean, our God is running this place. And if he allows me or you to become sick, he has a purpose, and his grace is sufficient. That being said, we need to be wise, so follow the instructions that the CDC gives and take care of yourselves. But let me give you that other piece of instruction. Take advantage, if you stay home, take advantage of the opportunity by setting up specific times. I will watch the video at this time, if not live, at a specific time. I will prepare my homework and review my materials at a certain time. And I think you'll not only grow in your understanding of Hebrew, but you'll grow as a person, better equipped and better prepared to serve the Lord. Because one of the biggest problems we have to face is the fact that growing up and becoming an adult involves learning to discipline yourself to make things get done, make sure things get done. And when I accomplish that, I'll tell you how I did it. But right now, I hope I'm not that far lost and that far gone. But anyway, open your Bibles, your Hebrew Bibles, to Exodus chapter 21. In this passage, which is, what was it, 38 or 30, I think it is 38 verses long. Oh no, 37 verses. I knew I was way off. 37 verses long. We get a rather, it's pretty simple Hebrew for the most part, pretty straightforward stuff. And we're going to get a chance to see how the Hebrew legal literature is written. Now, there are basically two kinds of legal cases. I shouldn't say legal cases, of legal literature, two kinds of legal literature that we have in the Bible. One is apodictic law. And you're already very familiar with apodictic law. Apodictic law is thou shalt not. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make unto yourselves no graven image. Honor your father and your mother. It's the proclamation of general law, general principles of practice, and general rules. Those are incredibly useful and necessary, really, for any society and certainly for God's people. We're fallen people living in a fallen world, and we need some clear guidelines. It's the reason that when we get to the Psalms, Psalm 119, we have Psalms like, "Oh, how I love your law, it is my meditation all the day. And wherewithal shall a young man, how will a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed to his way, according to your word." The love of the word of God, we always read Psalm 119 as love of the word, but if you read the text clearly, it keeps referring to the law. The law and the precepts and the judgments and the statutes, various Hebrew words, but they all are related to the legal literature. And it's very basic. And I mention this because when we come to the New Testament, Paul is dealing with Jews who have written their own law. They've taken the law of God and they've added to it. That was the procedure of the Pharisees. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they wanted to not break the law. But to be fair, they understood that they could never keep the law. They understood that they were not morally capable of purging their inner lives. But their conclusion was, and you've probably heard this, if your good deeds outweigh your bad, well, something like that. If I can live a consistent outward life, even if I have inward sins that I can't stop, then God will accept me based on how hard I worked to get there, how much I did to please Him. And in order to make sure that they would not break the law, they did what they call put a hedge around the law. They divided the whole law of Moses into 613 commandments, and then they made rules that were not part of the commandment, but to protect you from breaking the commandment. So the sort of the classic ones for me are the laws concerning the Sabbath. The law in Deuteronomy and in Exodus 20, the statements about the Sabbath are pretty straightforward. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, observe the Sabbath day. Keep the Sabbath is basically what it says. And that's the law. He says, now what does it mean? Don't do any work, not you or anybody in your household. And that's it. Remember why? Because you're related to the God who created the world in 7 days, and you're related to the God who brought you safely out of the land of Egypt and when you were slaves. So give your slaves a break by giving them Sabbath off, or your servants a break by giving them the Sabbath off. And that's about all that's found in those passages. But in the Mishnah, there are, it's interesting, there are hundreds, literally, of rules that are made to protect you from violating the Sabbath. For example, one of the things it says in the Sabbath commandments is you're not to go in and out on the Sabbath day. So the Pharisees sat down and says, now wait a minute, in and out, what does that actually mean? How will we know? And how can we make sure we never go in and out on the Sabbath day? You know, because we could mess up and not have it work out if we don't learn. So they sat down and they established a pattern. They said, okay, I've read this myself in the Mishnah, English translation. I'm not claiming to be an Aramaic or a late Hebrew scholar. But it says, if a beggar comes to you on the Sabbath day, and you're minded to give him a penny, it wasn't a penny, but it was the smallest coin that was out there. He said, if you reach out your window or through your doorway and give him the penny, you have broken the Sabbath. If he reaches through your window or through your doorway to receive the penny, he has broken the Sabbath. But if you step out of your house and hand him the penny while you're outside, or invite him into your house and hand him the penny once he's inside, then you haven't violated the Sabbath. And of course, we see this all the time in the New Testament, in the life of Christ, later in some of the dealings of the Apostle Paul, where they are constantly being accused of breaking the Sabbath when they weren't. They were breaking the traditions that had grown up around the Sabbath. As a result, Paul has a great deal to say about how the law, about how you're not saved by law. And he's right. And this has led some Christians to treat the law as a bad thing. I even remember hearing one dispensationalist argue vigorously, and he wasn't just some guy off the street, he was a serious, recognized dispensational scholar, argue seriously that the law was the result of Israel's failure. When God offered them the law, they should have said, no, we don't want the law. We want to live by grace through faith. But they asked for the law, so they got stuck with it. And it was wrong of them. It was a sin for them to do that. When I read in Exodus 19 and Deuteronomy about the interactions between God and Israel, the Lord is pleased with his people. He expects them to live by the law. And we come to the New Testament, the same Paul who tells us that we shouldn't live by the law, or that we can't live by the law, at the end of his book lists a lot of rules. And we understand those rules aren't there to save us, because we can't do that. It won't work that way. I can never be good enough to save myself. And even as a Christian, I can never be good enough to sanctify myself. But they're there because I am responsible as a member of God's people to live in a way that pleases him. And if I don't have a standard, if I don't have examples to follow, if I don't have guiding principles, then I'm in trouble. And that's one of the functions of the law, one of the primary functions. We know from the New Testament, the law was there to show us that we're sinners. It is also there to show those who are God's people and following the Lord what it is that God expects of them, and what the standards are for living a godly life. But there's a third reason, a third function of the law, and we'll bump into it from time to time in our study of Exodus 21. And that function is the law of Moses was the constitution of the nation of Israel. I call them the nation of Israel. In the book of Genesis, Israel was a family. At the beginning of the book of Exodus, in captivity in Egypt, we could call them a nation, I suppose, but the right word would be a people. They're a bunch of people who are ultimately related to Abraham through Isaac and Jacob and the sons of Jacob. And but they aren't yet a nation because they need two more things. They have a population, but they also need to have a constitution and territory. Well, the territory, of course, will come in Joshua when they conquer the land of Canaan. And it is in Exodus through Deuteronomy that Israel gets their constitution. In other words, it's the law of the land. Israel is the one nation in all of history that legitimately was a theocracy, a nation where God was the government. This shows up very clearly when we get to the time of the kings, or really in 1st and 2nd Samuel. In 1 Samuel, we have Saul crowned as king, and he fails. And he fails because he's trying to be a king like the kings around him. He's taking charge. I have to solve this, the famous things here. I'm not supposed to go until Samuel comes and offers a sacrifice. Well, Samuel's late. My people are deserting me. The army's getting smaller. I have to do this. I'm the king. I've got to take charge of the situation. I don't get to wait on, and he's thinking of himself as the head of the government. Now, when Saul was removed, he died, of course, in battle. David comes to the throne after 7 years of struggle. He becomes the king over all Israel. And he has an interesting title. It's the most popular title the Lord uses for David. My servant David. It could, and the word servant is Ebed, it could also be translated my slave David. And the point is, David understood what Saul never did. David understood that the real king of Israel, the real governor and ruler and government of Israel was the Lord himself. And the king on earth was simply the Lord's representative. He was the one who was the human being on the ground to enforce what the Lord said and to communicate what the Lord said and to guide the people to do things God's way. But he wasn't the king. Ultimately, everything depended on the Lord. And I'm not talking about the Lord was over that in the same way that God providentially is over the governing of all the nations or the events and covering all the nations and all the circumstances. He was in a very specific way the king of Israel. And again, the Sabbath proves that. Israel had a limited number of crimes for which the death penalty was required. Almost all of them, if you look at them properly, were crimes against the Lord. They were all basically crimes of, what we call treason. I am not being faithful to the Lord. And one of the ways that shows up is in the Sabbath. In the law, there's a law which says, if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're to be executed. And you say, well, and that's why I always wonder when people want to tell me that Sunday is the modern Christian Sabbath, and I go, so when people don't show up on Sunday morning, we need to hunt them down and kill them, right? Because that's what the law said. But it said it, interestingly enough, and the only time it was ever intended to be enforced was when God was actively ruling Israel. After the Babylonian captivity, we have lots of failures to keep the Sabbath, but never was there any indication the Lord expected them to execute, because now the kingdom of Israel is being ruled by Gentiles. God's not directly ruling anymore. He's not the government. They're under the Persians or they're under the Greeks. Later they're under the Romans. But there's coming another day when Jesus will come and everything will be restored to the way it was supposed to be, with God as the government. Jesus Christ being the Son of David, being his representative on earth. That's the millennium, of course. And I'm telling you all this to explain what's going on in the law. I start off by saying there are two kinds of legal literature that are found in the law. The first was apodictic law, and it states those general rules. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, honor your father and your mother. And of course, The first four all deal with the relationship to the Lord. Have no other gods before me, don't swear, well, the second one was make no graven images. And if you read the text carefully, you discover make no images of the Lord, and then make no, and then don't swear in the Lord's name and not keep your word, not follow through, and so forth. So we see those, but there's since the Lord was the government, and government handles day-to-day events. Turns out in day-to-day events, those rules, those general rules are wonderful, but they don't solve all the problems. My friend's ox gored my ox. I can get a nice set of things from the law about what not to do. If I'm mad at my friend for letting his ox run wild and gore my ox, and now my ox is dead, I know from the law I'm not allowed to kill him. But how does that work? And so there's a second kind of law. Instead of apodictic law, you have casuistic or case law. And this is the majority of the laws in the Old Testament. Case law says, if this situation arises, this is what you do. And in most cases, you'll have a general case law. If this happens, then do this. And then there will be secondary laws that clarify and adapt to more specific situations. Then see that in just a few minutes when we get into chapter 21 of Exodus. It's useful to note that these if-then laws have a problem or potential problem for young Hebrew students who are in their early stages of learning. And they sometimes can even have problems for all the rest of us old-timers. But most of the time they're pretty straightforward because Hebrew doesn't have a specific marker in most cases between the if clause and the then clause, the protasis and the apodosis, as the technical terms are. So you'll have an if at the beginning, and then you'll have one or more statements, one or more clauses, sometimes even a paragraph. And then you'll have another set of clauses, and sometimes there'll be an and, but most of the time there won't be, and you just somehow have to figure out that, oh, we have moved from the if, the situation, to the then, what we're supposed to do in that situation, how we're supposed to handle that situation. And it's not as hard as it might seem. You'll do it almost spontaneously without realizing it. But I want you to point it out because sometimes it can get confusing. We won't be looking at it, but if we went to Deuteronomy 24, we would have a very famous situation which Jesus himself dealt with because the Jews were divided on the matter. It says, if a man marries a woman and he finds some uncleanness in her and he puts her away, that is, he divorces her, and then he marries another woman and then he divorces her, then he can't go back to the first woman. Well, that's how Jesus interpreted it, and that's how one group, the school of Shammai, interpreted it. But the Hebrew says, if he marries a woman and he finds unfaithfulness or uncleanness in her, and he divorces her, and he marries another woman, and he what's the word I want? And he, I should have mentioned, and he writes her a bill of divorcement is what it actually says. And he marries another woman, and he divorces her, and he imperfect again, will not go back to his first wife. And the answer is, where's the then in there? Which of those and clauses represents the then? For the school of Hillel, they said that it was the first one. If a man marries a woman and finds some uncleanness in her, then he must write her a bill of divorcement. They say, if you don't like your wife, you have to divorce her. And interestingly enough, they said if she burns your dinner, if she just is irritable, Boy, women had no standing at all in the school of Hillel. And so Jesus dealt with it. He says, you know, there's no divorce. Whom God has joined together, let man put asunder. Because the law wasn't about when it was okay to divorce. It was about when it was okay to remarry. It was dealing with a situation where somebody is already divorced. And you have to figure that out from the context. You can't just say, see, there's the marker, there's the word then. But there isn't a then there. It's just an and another and another and another and. You have to find out which one is the one that's really relevant. But as I said, it won't be that hard. Let's see if we can see how that works. To do that, I need to, well, get up and set up everything here. I need to put, if I get in here. Oh wait, yeah, I can do that here. All right, I'm going to go and become a tiny little creature in the background, but hopefully I can help you to see what's going on even with that. In the future, I will try to do more where we can have everything on the slide. So I won't have to, because anything I write on the board doesn't show up on the slide. But anyway, here we go. If I'm not mistaken now, I'm a little bump and there's an empty space. Let's get that space started up right. Whoops. I don't know where. Well, let's do it again and get it. There we go. I thought I'd replace this, but I didn't. All right. Well, we'll live with it. I had worked very carefully to make it so it went one slide at a time, and it isn't doing it, so I'll live with it. All righty. Here's what we have. Here's our first of the laws, Exodus 21, 1 through 5. On this slide, and actually the first of the case laws here is Exodus 21, 1 through 6. Now watch how it works. You just follow along on the screen, if you will, and I'll be doing this in the background. Okay. Wa'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lepanehem. And these are the judgments, I guess I would just use that word. Some translated ordinances, but these are the judgments which you shall set before them. The Lord is speaking to Moses. The them refers to the children of Israel in the context. This is the chapter right after the giving of the Ten Commandments. And this phrase, wa'ela ex, this is what is called a cleft construction. We have them in English. We use them even more than Hebrew does. We say something like, often we use the word there. There was a man who said hello to my wife. Now what the sentence actually says is, a man said hello to my wife. But I said, there is a man, and it's a cleft. I've rearranged things, and I put the predicate, as it were, in a subordinate clause, a relative clause. And the same thing happens here. These are the judgments. Which judgments? Which you are to set before them. The real force of this is you shall set these judgments before them. Now, why do we have this roundabout way of talking? Well, this is a matter of discourse analysis. This is not about how the sentence, because that first line is just one sentence. But that one sentence is relevant to the entirety of what's following. Here we go, these are, and I think the next time we have a these are is like chapter 25 or something. And it's so, these are the, if you took Genesis with me, you remember these are the generations of, they mark new sections. Well, here these are the judgments, they mark a new section. I've just given you the Ten Commandments. Now these are the other things. These are the way you solve it. What's very interesting is, of course, when we come to the book of Deuteronomy, the Ten Commandments don't change. a slight rewording of certain things. Instead of keep the Sabbath, we have observe the Sabbath, which is just a difference of verb. But we have almost no overlap, almost no repetition of the case laws. Because case law is never ended. There's always going to be more cases and nothing is going to be said. So what we have here are basically sample case laws. I'm trying to look up there when you're right here. But our sample case laws, whose job it is to kind of show us how to solve these problems, applying the principles that are written out in the apodictic law, particularly the Ten Commandments, to specific circumstances and situations. And so here we have that first verse is just an announcement saying, new section of the law. As I said, we come to chapter 22, there won't be another one. Chapter 23, there won't be another one. So they all have this if-then type of legal language. Now, I said there were two kinds of case laws. There was the general basic case law, and then there were case laws that were adapted to more specific circumstances, to exceptional circumstances. There's the general rule, and then there's the rule that we apply when there's something else going on. And they do mark the difference here, and it's really straightforward. Notice verse 2 begins with key. In this case, this key has the meaning if. It is the condition of the conditional statement for a general condition. But if you look down to verse 3, right here, that is second line next to the last, third line, second from the end, you see another if, the more common if, im. And you'll find consistently as you go through this chapter, key introduces the general law, im introduces a more specific situation. So we'll say from key to key will be a section. And we can see that, and I'll just do it this way because I think this is working. Notice at the end of this we had a key, and all the rest are im up to this point, and there's a summit. Right there at the end of verse 6, there's a summit saying this is the end of a paragraph. An open paragraph. I mean a closed paragraph. And then we come to verse 7, and look at there it is. There's a key. What key? But if. And then we go all the way down to verse 11, and we have another summit. And then we'll have some other things. But look down in verse 14. We have a different structure in verses 12 and 13. 13's there. And when we come down to verse 14, there's our key again. What key? But in this case, there's no subdivision, so they just leave it there. And then we have again that structure in 16 and 17, another structure. But there in verse 18, there's a key. And verse 20, there's a key. But in between verses 18 and 20, there's an im at the beginning of verse 19. My point being, this is a very useful way. You can figure out, if you're teaching it, if you're studying it for yourself, you're preaching it, you're teaching your way through the book of Exodus, chapter 21, then you can know the basic rules. So you can say, okay, the first law, and I'll just go back to it now. The first law that is dealt with here is Exodus 21, 1 through 6. And then there are subdivisions in there dealing with specific situations. Let's see if we can play this out. Ti kikne eved ivri she shanim, ya avod. U shatiit, yitse la hafshi chidam. All right. If, that's that first word. If you acquire, you might even translate it when you acquire perhaps, if you acquire a Hebrew slave, 6 years he shall serve. Third line down, second line in verse 2. And in the seventh year, and in the seventh, no year, but implied year, and in the seventh, he will go out. And the phrase here, la chafshiv, when you look it up, it's an idiom. It'll look weird. You'll say it doesn't work. It means free, for nothing. He will go out free, and hinam means without basis, in other words, without needing any payment. In other words, you bought him for 7, and you can he'll serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year, you have to let him go, and you can't make him pay you for anything. And you can't sell him to anybody. You have to let him go. Now that's the basic rule. Now let's be careful. This rule applies to an eved. Eved is a male servant. And it applies specifically to an eved ivri, a Hebrew slave. A male Hebrew slave who has been sold into slavery or has sold himself into slavery, and it's told after 6 years you let him go. He has to go free. You have no right to him after the 6th year. But there's a lot of other issues that can come up when we're talking about slaves. We come to verse 3 and it says, Im. Now this is a specific subcategory of this law. Im bagapo yavo bagapo yetse. If single, unmarried or alone, but probably here it means single. If single, he came in. Single, he'll go out. Im ba'al isha hu, if a husband of a wife is he, or was he, I could probably be right. Wayatsa'a, I should say, ishto imo. Then his wife will go out with him. When he goes, they go. If they came into slavery together, they go out of slavery together. She's married, so she has a protector. So, got basic rule. Hebrew slave, worked 6 years, and you got to let him go in the 7th. If that Hebrew slave comes in single, when he leaves single. If, on the other hand, he came in married, when he leaves married. That takes care of verse 3. Verse 4 then deals with another possibility. He says, Im Adonau yetin lo isha, why yal da lo banim o banot ha'isha wa lalech wa we la deha tihye la adoneha wahu yetse bagapo. If her Lord, now notice interesting, subject first now. If his obviously in the context refers back to the slave, if his master, his Adon, his Lord, if his master gave him a wife and she gave birth to sons for him. Now the question is for whom? The answer is found to sons or daughters for him. Then the wife and her children belong to, I should say, her master. And he, the slave, goes out by himself. He goes out alone. Now the idea here is the children belong to the master. He arranged the marriage on purpose, apparently, to produce some more slaves for himself. And so he says the children stay with their mother. So the children of the slave belong to the master, but you don't leave them without their mother. And so that's a third situation. General rule, 6 years you go free. But that doesn't apply, and that applies if you come in single, you go out single. Come in married, you go out married. If, however, you came in single and you got a wife from your master and she produced children who are born in slavery, then she and the children stay in slavery. And you can go out, but not her. That's verse 4. Now we come down to verse 5. Another im. Wa'im amar yomar ha'eved ha'ahavti et adoni et ishti va'et banai lo etze chafshi. Says, if, and this is interesting, the servant indeed says, we have this infinitive absolute here, which is often used to amplify or emphasize. In this case, I think it almost has to say, I think many translations say plainly says. I'm not sure that's exactly the sense of what's going on here. It's not how clear the statement was, but the fact that the statement was freely given. It wasn't something that was inferred or something. He said, if he really says, he's a slave, and he really says, I love my master and my wife and my children, I will not go out free. Remember, here's the hafshi, right up here with the hafshi, free. That is free at no cost. So I won't leave at no cost. Now, that's kind of significant because there is a possibility that he could buy his wife and children out of slavery, but he'd have to work for it. But the point is here. Now, notice we're still in the if clause, and we have 3 things here. We said if this servant who has to leave his wife and children behind if he goes. If he in turn says, no, I love my wife, I love my master, my wife, and my children. Therefore, implied, I refuse to go. I will not go out free. If that happens, what happens? Well, let's take a look at verse 6. Here's another what. Notice it. Wa higsho adamau el ha-Elohim. And he, the master, and his master, and this is a vav consecutive perfect. A vav consecutive perfect. This is, and this will happen, or this, in this case, then he shall, the idea of being the law here, he shall bring him, there's the O on the end, he shall bring him to the God, or to, some say to the judges, implying that we know that in some cases the word judge, the judges were called Elohim. Jesus talks about it even in the time in the New Testament, because they represented the Lord's justice. So it could be he's bringing him to the judges, which makes good sense here. But he shall bring him to God or to the judges, and he shall bring him unto the door or unto the doorpost. Key is it's something that's a solid piece of wood that you can rely upon. And he shall, another vav consecutive preterite. Twice we've had, and he shall bring him out. And now it's, and he shall bore. And now he shall pierce. And his master, I should say, will pierce his ear with an awl. And he will serve him, the text says forever, that is for the rest of his life, as long as he lives. Another vav consecutive preterite. The subject is he. In the context, it has to be the servant or the slave that we're talking about, will serve, because the master is not going to serve the slave for the rest of his life. It's the slave will serve the master for the rest of his life. Now, this is kind of, you may have heard this before. For some reason, when I was a kid, I remember a lot of preachers liked to talk on this one. So we have one. Now, we've read through it. We're going to take a break now, and in 10 minutes, we'll start over. We'll go back and look at it, and we'll take it apart. We'll analyze the grammar and verb forms and so forth to see what we can learn. But as I said, that'll come in exactly 10 minutes, which on my watch would mean 7 o'clock. So we'll see you then. All right, we're back. As you can see now, while you were away, I made some changes to the slide. I'm not going to save them. I wish I may save them as a separate file, but anyway. We have this initial statement here. As I said, it's what is known as an introduction. When you have a story, you have a setting. When you have something that's not a story, you have an introduction. But they have more or less the same function. It just establishes what we're talking about. This section is about setting. This section is about judgments, which basically, as we see, turn out to be case laws. And then we have the if-then clauses, and I've highlighted the ifs, the if clauses. Verse 2 there, ki tikne evid ivri, if you acquire, second masculine singular, if you acquire a Hebrew servant. That's the first one. Then the second one is, if alone he came in. The third if clause, if his master gives to him a wife, and she gives birth to sons or daughters. And then in verse 5, all of verse 5 is the if clause. If he really says, and I see I got Amar, missed the yod there, it should be read. If he really says, if the servant really says, I love my wife, I love my master and my wife and my children, I will not go out. And that's the quotation there. If he says that, then whatever comes next. Now, what I want you to notice in this case is I have a ki plus an imperfect, then an im with an imperfect, an im with an imperfect, and an im with an imperfect. They all use the imperfect, but they're not talking really about the future, are they? This is not something we know for sure is going to happen in the future. This is an imperfect of uncertainty. If this happens, and it's likely to, because it's not. If it were, it's not a. There is a Hebrew construction for things that can't happen or won't happen, or almost never happen. If I were a woman, which I am not and never going to be, so there you go. If the sky were pink, if rain fell up, those kinds of things, Hebrew has a specific instruction for, and they certainly wouldn't appear in the law. The law has to deal with things which are not only possible, but relatively likely. And that's what we have here. If this happens, and that's it. In English, we're going to translate this as a present tense, because that's how we say it in English. And I want you to get used to this. The idea is not, what does the imperfect mean? When it comes to translation, when it comes to interpretation, the question is, what idea is the imperfect communicating? In this case, it is the idea of some sort of hypothetical situation. What's technically called in the language of linguistics, irrealis, what is not absolutely real, but is potentially real, in this case. But he's not talking about a real situation. He's not saying, when Bob purchased that Hebrew slave, he kept it for 6 years and let it go in the 7th year. That would be historical writing. That would be narrative, telling what actually happened. If I'm reading in the prophets, I would see a lot of imperfects, involve consecutive preterists, but their force would not be hypothetical. Maybe, might be that Messiah will come. No, he's saying this is something that is sure. This is the future. This is what's going to happen. But in this construction, as indicated by the particles ki and im, and there were the word right here, and im, the force is hypothetical. Possibly, probably somebody sometime will have to deal with this, so let's talk about it. So we have a general statement here with the key, and then we have more specific ones afterwards. And I want you to see, it was using the imperfect. In one of your assignment this week, so I won't dwell on it, is to go through, read through the section. It's posted on the website and in Canvas, and I believe that you should have no trouble getting to it. I tested it, and it's supposed to be good. Let me know if it isn't. But you go through and say, all right, what is this? What's going on with this imperfect? How does he say it? I will deal with discourse analysis next time and talk about the discourse explanation. I want you to see the grammatical explanation that Williams offers. And one of the things I want you to see is, and I've already pointed it out, it is not that the very meaning, if you want to use that term, the very sense of the imperfect is determined to a large extent by its context. In other words, I can't look at an imperfect and say, oh, I know what that is. In English, when we want to express that kind of hypothetical thing, as I say, we normally use the present tense. And that's the best way to translate it here. If you acquire a servant, a Hebrew servant. And then I want you to notice, look at the then clauses. They're the things that aren't underlined at this point. In this case, how do I know that I go from, why don't I have the if clause continue on? Think about it for a minute here. And look, what's changed? This is an imperfect. He will serve. So I have an imperfect and then followed by another imperfect. How do I know this is the apodosis, not a continuation of the prodosis? Notice something. Shesh shanim, 6 years, comes before the verb. This is what is a construction which is sometimes called the ex-verb construction. First comes something else, then the verb. Whereas in this case, the clause begins with the verb, followed by, this verb is you acquire, and then we have the object, a Hebrew servant. In this case, we're going to have it reversed again. If alone he comes in, and in this case, if his master gives him a wife, and he says, but here again, the verb's first, if. The crucial point is not, oh, there's a rule about which order the verb comes when you're dealing with an if and then clause. The point is, the author is going to indicate the change by sense and also, in many cases, by a change in the form. Sometimes it's a change in the verb form. In this case, it's a change in the word order. Notice, if you acquire a Hebrew slave, the logical order in Hebrew as in English is, he will serve 6 years. And he will come out free in the 7th year for nothing. But the author moves, Moses here, the composer, moves the time markers to the beginning of the clause. 6 years he will serve. In the 7th he will come out. Now why is that? In most grammar books, and I think even Williams does this, in most grammar books they'll say, for emphasis. I really can't complain about that, although I will, as you will discover. What I mean by that is I can't complain because it is emphatic. But the problem is, emphatic doesn't tell me anything. I noticed that this is an unusual order, and so I noticed it. That means it's emphatic. It means something I paid special attention to. The question has to be, why is this placed in this order? Why does the author want me to take special note of this? Because the issue in this law, this is not artsy stuff. This is a law. And he wants to say, now I want you to notice something. The issue here is time. You can serve, but 6 years, that's the limit. And I'm going to put that 6 years in a place where where it will cause you to notice it, because it's not the normal place for me to place that. And then he does the same thing. And in the 7th year, so twice, one clause right after another, he shoves the key issue, the central point of the law. The law, in the general law, has to do with, and so if you're talking about what's the topic of this, of verse 2? The topic of verse 2 is how long a Hebrew slave can, or a Hebrew man can be held as a slave by another Hebrew man. And the answer is 6 years, no 7th. Now notice that's not the subject of the clause. The subject of the clause, the subject of the verb, ya'avod, is the slave. 6 years he will serve. But this is the topic. This is the point. But in other words, we're interpreting here. The author has given us a way of knowing what his point is. The point of this is how long a slave can serve. A Hebrew slave can serve as a slave. And the answer is 6 years, and in the 7th he goes out. And for nothing. He doesn't have to pay. Because if he had to pay, then it would be conditional. But there's no condition to his getting out. Now he wants to go to that, making some refinements now to the law. All right, if he comes in, if single, unmarried, he comes in, then unmarried or single, he goes out. And again, the imperfect, yavo and yetse, both of them are indicating this hypothetical situation. Given this situation, then this will happen. And again, we say, well, this is unusual. Normally, we would say, if he comes in single, and I think many English translations do this, they make it comfortable for us. I'm a little uncomfortable with them doing that, because the point of the author was to highlight it. If single he comes in, and single he will go out, or he goes out. And you go, single. I want to make it clear. It says whatever, and we'll find the status is going to be reinforced. Whatever status he had coming in is the status he has going out. And that goes all the way down to the next one. Or the next two, actually. Pardon me. Oh, I didn't get the if here. I should have, there's the clause. If the husband of a wife was he, as if, on the other hand, he wasn't single. He's the husband of one wife when he came in. Then his wife will go out with him. Notice, he goes out because he's been a slave for 6 years. That's it. That's the given that we're amplifying here. But it matters. If he came in single, then he goes out single. If he came in married, he goes out married. His wife goes with him. But if he came in single and took a wife, now we've got a new one. And that's what happened. And it's crucial. It isn't he found himself a wife. If his master assigned a wife to him, and more than that, and she has borne to him sons or daughters. And I think in the context, the him must mean the master. They're the blood descendants of the slave, but she was placed there by the master, and the children that are born slaves, born into slavery. And so they can't take the children away. They are slaves. And as slaves, they belong to a master. And since he didn't bring the child, now, what's not stated here, but implied, is if a man was married when he came in, and during the 6 years he was working, his wife had a couple of children, they all go out together. Because those children weren't there because of the master's activity. It was because the master picked her and assigned Yatain, assigned her as his wife. And she gave birth to sons or daughters. Then the woman and her children will be or are belonging to her master. But he, her husband, goes out single. In other words, the general principle is 6 years he goes out, and that's true if you went in single. It's true if you went in married. It's true if you went in single and you were assigned a wife while you were a slave. A man goes free in the 6th year, in the 7th year. Point being, this whole section is talking about one thing. Different avenues, different aspects of it, different perspectives on it, but all of this is dealing with one topic, which is the freeing of a Hebrew slave. How long he can work and when he's set free and what are the circumstances under which he is set free. Now there's one other possibility that it has to be dealt with, and it takes a little more doing to explain it. So we have an entire verse devoted to it. We've already seen it. But here again, if he really says, that is, not just he's coerced into saying or he feels sad about leaving, but if he really says, this is something, of course the point again is it's about the slave going free. The master can't say, well, he has a wife, so he's going to stay my slave, because I wouldn't want to separate a husband and wife. The answer is it doesn't matter. If he's willing to leave, he gets to go. The master can't coerce him into staying his slave by having him have children by a woman. But if he decides he does want to stay, he does want to be with his wife and children, even at the cost of never ever being anything but a slave, then if he really says, if the slave really says, I love my wife and my master and my wife and my children, literally it says my sons, but the idea is undoubtedly whatever children were born. It says, and then he makes it very interesting, I will not go out free. Now this, I will not, this say here almost has to be at least understood like a coordinative. This is an expression of his will, a refusal to leave. I refuse to be set free. Now notice what, again, the topic is setting free. He says, he was made a slave, he served 6 years, he goes free. If he was single, he goes free single. If he was married, he goes free married. If he was single and then got married, he goes free single and has to leave his wife and children behind if the master signed it. And then it says, and the only exception to that is if he refuses to go free. And you start seeing how this could somehow be really practical. We have some serious problems because we don't have slavery and we're not eager to get it, I assure you. And this is not me promoting slavery or anything else. But what it is saying is, look, there's a principle set up here, which is when a man is given the right to go free, he's the only one that can undo that right. And this probably can be applied to a lot of other things, where you say the principle is established here. Once the law is established, something is so, then the only person who can counter that would be the person who was the beneficiary of that law, not anybody else. He says, I don't want to leave, and guess what happens? Then and it's interesting, notice the repetition of his master. His master shall take him to the gods, or to the judges, or to God, and he, the master, will then take him to the door or the door frame, the door post. The idea seems to be, even if it's God, it's a matter of taking him to court and officially presenting him and having the man testify that he wants to stay a slave, to be with his wife and children and to serve this master he loves. And then in the presence of the judges or the presence of the witnesses, he would be taken over and they would bore a hole in his ear. So there would be a mark that would show forever that he was a voluntary slave. And he should take him to the doorpost and drill a hole or bore his ears The Hebrew actually says two. We usually say an ear, but it's actually two. Adonau bore holes in his ears. Here's the ears, his ears. Pardon me. His master will bore a hole in his ear. It's a singular. I was going to say, I didn't think it was right. Now I've forgotten my bar mitzvah. Lost of terms, so let's see if I can find it. Martzea. Oh, with an awl, of course. I knew that. But I forgot. Bore a hole in his ear with an awl. That is to punch a hole in his ear with an awl. By the way, it's a different, this verb, ratzah, that means to punch a hole in something. In Psalm 22, when it talks about the translation is they pierced my hands and my feet. That's the one that's normally used in English translation because we want to assign it to Jesus. It's interesting, the Hebrew word there is not ratzah, a word that means to punch a hole in something, which is what would happen if you nail somebody to a cross. No, the word that's used there is a word which means to dig out. And it's interesting, the New Testament never associates that particular portion of Psalm 22 with the death of Jesus Christ. It is not quoted as a fulfillment of Scripture. Be wary of doing so. Because I think if you look at Psalm 22 carefully, you'll discover that what they're describing is, he's describing himself as if he were a guy who was dying and the dogs have come around and started dismembering his body before he's dead. He's so weak they can't come and stop him. And when wild dogs come and attack a corpse or a helpless creature, they don't have really good bite. They tear meat out. They don't bite it off. They don't have incisors like they have big tearing teeth. And so what they would do is they would start with the fingers and feet, the hands and feet, and start tearing things loose. And then as the pieces come free, they would start tearing more and more and more. And that's apparently what David is talking about in Psalm 22. He's not describing a crucifixion there, as much as we want to believe it, and much as it makes it so wonderful. We are not violating Scripture if we don't see that, because, like I said, the New Testament quotes several places in Psalm 22, but explicitly never mentions Psalm 20, the piercing of his hands and his feet. All right, back we go. As a fulfillment of Psalm 22. All right, but the point is here. We have the mark, which means a man is walking around with a hole in his ear. We have to understand this is something he chose, and it's a choice that will matter for the rest of his life. It's not something that could be done flippantly. And next week, I'm not so sure I made the right choice. The answer is too bad. Once you make this choice, there's no going back. You have the mark in your flesh, and it will not go away. That's the sense of this. And it's your choice. That's the crucial point. No Hebrew man could be retained as a slave against his will. Now, let's move into the 1850s and 60s when they were trying to get rid of slavery in America, or back into the 1830s and 20s and 30s when they were trying to get rid of slavery in the British Empire. How doesn't this? Oh, wow. They say, but the Bible says it's okay to be a slave. And they say, wait a minute, the Bible says you can't be a slave unless you're willing to be a slave. You can be a slave for 6 years, and then you have to be set free, unless you choose not to be. Oh, one more thing, and let me back it up one. Oops, that's not where I want to go, is it? I want to go back up. Let's do that. We'll do that. All right. This bugs a lot of people. Why doesn't the woman why don't the woman and children go out? The answer is, I think, the text doesn't explain it, But the answer, I think, is not as sinister as those who sneer at the Bible want to make it. The woman, the slave woman that was assigned by the slave master to the slave, once they're set free, their relationship is unclear. She was his wife by right of by the authority of the slave master. But once he becomes free, his relationship to that woman is not clear cut. He really should almost have to remarry her to make it clear that she really is his wife and these children really are going to stay as his children. Which means you set a woman free and she has no man to care for her, then this presents a very serious problem. Because there aren't jobs for women in ancient Israel. I mean, they worked their tails off. A woman would work in the field, women would work in the fields, but they would do so because they were hired from their father would place them in the fields. But if she's a slave woman, that means her family's not there for her. Otherwise, she wouldn't be a slave. As we'll see in the next section, sometimes the father is forced by economic circumstances to sell his daughter into slavery. But if he is, then that means he doesn't have the wherewithal to take care of her. And once she's gone into slavery, her status as a potential bride goes way down. And so I say we start releasing these women out into the culture, and they have no one to care for them. We're placing them in a situation where they may be the only way they can make a living, at least initially, is prostitution, which is a crime punishable by death. And so, whatever else is going on, I think we can see that at least potentially there's some protection involved here of the women and the children by keeping them with the slave master. And allowing the man to stay, that does the same thing. It says, hey, I really want to be this woman's husband. I'm not just doing it because that was what my master told me to do. All right. That doesn't solve the problem. And I know we have a nasty, non-historical way of looking at things, where we say, we look at it from a 20th century view of slavery and say, there you go, and forget that every culture on the planet, many cultures to this day have slavery. We know that there's a certain amount of slavery going on in our country. It's a lot more than we'd like to believe, even now. But that every culture on earth recognized slavery until England and the United States got rid of it. And then it sort of spread to other countries. And it was, rather than saying, what's wrong with the Bible that it didn't get rid of it right away, point being, the Bible's not about fixing society, it's about saving souls and getting people right with God. But the point is, every movement, the initial movements, I should say, to get rid of slavery on this planet were from people who trusted in Jesus Christ. It's closely associated with people in the church. Yeah, there are lots of people in the church who opposed the end of slavery, but it was people in the church that pushed for it, both in the United States and in England. One, of course, being the great hymn writer, John Newton, Amazing Grace, who had himself been a slave master, a slave ship owner at one point, and from that experience came to really hate slavery and pushed with all of his heart to get rid of it. All right, let's go on to the next section, verse 7. And here we go again, and I don't have these all marked up, but let's see what it says. Waki yimkor ish et bito la'ama. And there's one of the things that can help you, we can see other reasons, but the Jews, the Masoretes, have given us marks to help us, these things. And it says, here's where you pause. And what we see is this: if sells a man his daughter as a female slave, as a house servant. And you go, oh. Lo, she shall not go out like the going out of male slaves. Lo tetze katzet ha-avadim. You go, oh, so there's the first thing. It says, if a man sells his daughter into slavery, she stays a slave. And this will help deal with the issue I just raised here. Im ra'ah ba'enei adoneha asher lo ya'ada wa hefdaha la'am nakri lo yishmol la'makri makrah b'givvo baha. All right. We had the basic law. If a man sells his daughter into slavery, she doesn't go out in after 6 years. She stays a slave. And we'll begin, as we look at what's going on, we'll begin to see what's going on here. Now it works. If evil in the eyes of her master, that is, if he finds her something wrong with her, of her master, and we're told what kind of her master, who did not designate her for himself. You go, oh, I get it. This is a secondary wife. This isn't some woman that's been hired to go work in the salt mines or put into slavery so that we can have her plowing fields or something. And this is a woman who has been brought into the home as a potential mate, a potential wife. And he says, if the master didn't designate her for himself, then he should let her be redeemed. Now, it's interesting, the word here. This is not the word for kinsman redemption, by the way, although a kinsman would often be the one who would do the redeeming. But let her be set free by payment. Wa hefdah. Let her be redeemed. It doesn't say she goes free. It says she's redeemed. That is, somebody pays for her freedom. Somebody reimburses the master for her. She came into his house. He purchased her from her father, and I think that's significant. It was a man selling his own daughter, so he was not just. We're not talking about just grabbing a woman to sell her for something, but this is a man who is thinking about doing something, presumably for his daughter's welfare, getting her in with a rich family or something. And the man decides he doesn't want her. He doesn't like her. The things about her, we're not told whether it's just ra'ah, evil. Evil, I should say bad. And some or other, she was bad in his eyes. He just didn't find her acceptable. He says then the man can let her be redeemed. He should say, okay, I don't want her, so you can buy her back, Dad. And in the context, that's probably we're talking about the man who sold her being allowed to buy her back, or her brothers, or someone else. But the person who buys her is buying her to set her free and presumably bring her into a relationship with her. And then we're given an interesting thing. La'am nakri, to a foreign people. Lo mashal la makraha. To a foreign people. And the mashal means have authority. The sun, moon, and stars have mashal, the day and the night. They rule over the day and night. It says, he does not had the right or the authority to sell her to a foreigner, to a foreign people. In other words, the idea being, oh, he bought this woman as a slave, decides he doesn't like her, and instead of saying, I will, I paid, let's say he paid $100, just picking a number, a nice round number. He says, I paid $100. He says, now you can go to the family and say, give me back my $100. She's all yours again. She's free. I don't want her. He says, that's acceptable. That's appropriate. That's proper. That's what you should do. What you cannot do, so what you don't have the right, what he doesn't have the right to do, is buy her for $100 and then say, you know what, if I sell her to the Canaanites, I can sell her for $500. Make a $400 profit. He says, you can't do that. You can't make a profit selling Hebrews to others. Remember, this is a Hebrew woman too. It's a father. A man sells his wife. He doesn't have the right to sell her to these people. The big dough seems to me that the gad means probably. What is this big dough? I'm not doing well here. Oh well, I don't mind. I'll look at it. The gad. Ah. To sell her to a foreigner, and that's the infinitive construct, when he sets her free. Begad, when he lets, when he has acted faithlessly toward her. That's right, begad. I knew I would recognize that word. When he has treated her disgustingly. In other words, she was purchased with the idea that somehow he was going to take care of her. He decides he doesn't want her. He says, that's fine. Now return her. You get the money you put out, and everything's clear. Wonderful, nice. Books are all even. You're out nothing. She's not harmed. And the family's not harmed. You sell her to somebody else, then you're being unfair. You're being unfaithful. You're treating her traitorously, treacherously. You're promising one thing but not doing it. You hire somebody with I bought her to take care of my sweet child. And then 10 days later I sell her to the Canaanites for $500. And I get somebody else to take care of my sweet child because I've got money to put in the bank now to afford it. He says, that's treachery. You notice, the issue here is, in a sense, not even the woman as much as it is the treacherous nature of this. It says business dealings should be open and above board, even when we're dealing with a slave. And then we have a second sub-pattern here. Wa'im livno ye adana kamishpat habanot ya'aseh lah. He says, now if for his son he designated her, if he purchased her for himself, then he can return her. If he purchased her for his son, but he still found flaws in her, he didn't like her, he found her bad for some reason, then he shall do to her as what is just for daughters. In other words, he shall treat her as if she was his own daughter. See, there's some sense here. When you got married in Israel, when a woman got married, she became a part of her husband's family. Not just in the sense that she's a daughter-in-law, although they have the term for that, but she was, in a sense, really part of that family to the point that her own father no longer had authority over her. Think of, you go back to Genesis 38, the passage we were looking at last week, and do it in the English. The Hebrew is clear, but it's probably harder for you to get there. But look at it, you see Judah is scared to let his youngest son marry Tamar. So he sends her back to her father-in-law, to her father. But when he thinks she's committed adultery, when she's had sex with somebody outside of marriage, then he says, bring her out, I'm going to have her killed. Because I have the authority to execute her father doesn't. She's part of my family now. And that's the thing here, it says, you brought her in for your son, so she's your daughter. Now you treat her the same way you would treat your daughter. Again, avoiding treachery, being fair. Being fair to a woman who has, and the crucial thing about the woman here, a slave woman basically has no, what's the word I want? No leverage. She's not in, she can't fight the battles that you, so she's, oh. So, it's for you, you let her go. Send her back to her father and get a refund. But do not sell her to anybody else. You can't profit off of your foolish choice. And if you got her for your son and it didn't work out, then you treat her as if she's your own daughter and you provide for her the same way you would provide for your own daughter. And if you're going to sell her, then you better start selling your own children too. We do what's just, what's proper for a daughter. Verse 10, we have another subcategory, another situation that is associated with this. If, I read, im acheret yikach lo she'eraha kasuthaha wa onathaha lo yira. If another woman he takes to himself, that is, he marries another woman. So this woman was brought in, she was married to him. She was a slave, but she was brought into his home and made his wife. And then he marries another woman. Now, the Lord's already on record in Genesis the fact that marriage is supposed to be one man and one woman. It just wasn't practiced that way in Israel at the time. And so the Lord had several laws which acknowledge a practice which was not his will. But his goal here is not to stop multiple marriages. That's something else. He'll deal with that elsewhere. His goal here was, when there are multiple marriages, to make sure justice is done to the helpless victims. And in this case, the helpless victim is a slave woman who's made this man's wife. Then he marries another woman, presumably who is not a slave, and he says, now you be a slave and serve me and my wife. And so she goes from being his wife to being the slave of another woman. Not an acceptable thing. It really creates tension and pressure, and it's unfair to her. Think about Sarah and Hagar. Wasn't exactly the same situation, but it does provide a nice background to this. It didn't work out. And so he says he takes himself another woman. And then we have these things here. Her sha'er, her kasuth, and her anoth. He may not reduce. Now this is a little tricky here. Her sha'er. Take out your lexicon. Look up sha'er. Let's see exactly what this is. You'll see why I'm making you look it up in a minute. It's simple. You turn to, or you can look it up if you have a computer program that deals with it. But look at what it says. Sha'er. Shin ayin resh. Shin aleph resh, I mean. And look at sin. That's not right. What? There we go. my problem. I can't see the little dots. All right. Sha'er. The verb means to remain over, a remnant, not a blood relation. I'm trying to think what the translation we use is. Let's see. This is oh, come on. Well, I can't do that, that's why. Alrighty. I'll cheat, you do all the time, why can't I? Leviticus 21, and we're looking at verse 10. Not Leviticus, Exodus 21, what's wrong with me? Her food, which is here defined as her flesh, her body, that is the stuff that supplies her body. Her food, her kasuth. Look it up. Clothing. And then we have a term which is really hard to translate. And her onah. Onah. What's onah? Probably the most common translation is marital rights. What we're talking about is the sexual intimacy she has with her husband. See, we're talking about justice here. Says, you want to take another wife? Fine, you take another wife. I mean, it's not fine, but if a man takes another wife, then he can do it only if he maintains she gets just as much. She doesn't lose any food. She doesn't lose any clothing. She has just as many clothes as she always had. And she gets just as much time in bed with you as she always has. As one of my old professors pointed out, he said, this really throws a monkey wrench into the whole Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines thing. Thoroughly violating this principle. But what's the issue here? And we often get so hung up on the specifics we don't catch what's all this whole thing about. It's about justice. It's about being fair to people who are helpless, to, in this case, a slave woman. We finish verse 11. He says, now there's a 7. And if these three things he does not do for her, then she goes out free. There is no cost. She has the right to walk away, and she does not have to be. Her father and brother, other family members or friends don't have to come up with a penny. If he doesn't give her the same amount of food that she's always had. It's not the same amount as his new wife. It's the same amount she's always had. You can't reduce what she's had. The amount of time that she has with him in bed. All those things are rights here that are established by the marriage. And the husband, when he remarries, does not have when he marries a second time, does not have the right to interfere with any of those things. Now, to be honest, in real life, I'm thinking, in an actual experience, I'm thinking that's going to be really hard. Never having spent any time in Utah and run around with people who believe in having multiple spouses, even though they're not legal. So they have one legal wife and then they'll have 2 or 3 others. And they all, there's a TV show, I believe, I never saw it, but I heard about it. It's called Sister Wives or something. And they were trying to tell you how wonderful it was and everything else. And I'm going, I just don't buy it. If you were a wife and you had the exclusive attention of your husband, and now you're having to share it, that's going to be hard. even if you get all of these things. But it's a matter of justice. And I think so the normal situation is going to be if he wants to marry again, he needs to let his first wife leave and find another husband. You go, oh, it's about justice. All right, that's two of these major laws. And notice, again, there's a principle that runs, and that's the thing. Once I realize that the general rule is followed by a just rules case law that adjusts to specific situations, then I begin to start seeing how this law, what this law is teaching. Now when we come back, because we're about to take a break, we come back, we're going to say, hey, there's no he, there's no eem. And yet, it's not apodictic law. We'll talk about it in 10 minutes. Thank you. And we're back. I should have coughed beforehand. Oh, where am I? Hit the wrong button. There we are. That's where we want to be. Now it changed. We had an if-then situation. In this case, the situation is a little different. There is a sense of if-then, and it could have been expressed as an if-then. But in this case, notice, in these cases, I should say, all of them on this page, we are dealing with a sense of, it is less uncertain, less circumstantial, less situational. I'll show you what I mean. Watch this. Makeh, that is a hit-fail participle of the verb nakah, to smite, or to hit. A man, and this is the it's the hit-fail participle, so it's one who smites a man, and then we have and mate. Now mate can either be the participle, dying, or it can be the perfect. In this case, because the wow has a comment under it, it's probably the verb consecutive perfect. He strikes a man so that he dies. In other words, this is the kind of general rule. He strikes the man and the guy dies. He says, well, in that case, dying he shall die. You can't say that is, he shall absolutely be put to death. He shall surely be put to death. You use surely be executed, maybe a better way of saying it. You say, wait. He shall surely be put to death. They were just fighting. He wasn't trying to kill him. Doesn't matter. One of the principles that's repeated in a variety of ways in the law, when it comes to life, the protection of life, is that we are accountable for the effects of our actions, even if they weren't intended, especially when it comes to life and death. Remember, a man, Ish, is made in the image of God. And actions taken against that man, and particularly in this case, it would be probably, most of the time it would be a Jewish man, but in this case, it doesn't say that he's a Hebrew. He says, you do something to a human being, you have to answer to the God who created him, in whose image they exist. And he says, so you hit a man, leading to his death, then you die. You're executed as a murderer. The idea of first degree, second degree, and manslaughter were not part of the Jewish law. Why? Because you were accountable to make sure you didn't hurt other people. The life of a man was so precious that you were to take steps to make sure that they didn't die. If you built a house, and of course people, when they built their houses, they built them with flat roofs, so that they could go up on the roof in the evening and enjoy the cool in the evening, and not suffer inside the house, which would get hot during the day. Now at night you'd appreciate that warmth because it'd keep you warm when the night got really cold or really chilly. But in the evening you'd go, oh, it's been a hot day, I've been out in the field, let's go up on the roof. And he says, you build a house and you don't build a wall around the top of your house so that when you go up on the roof, someone could fall off the edge without anything to stop them. And someone does, you've committed murder. That's another law elsewhere. And the point is, what? He says, yes, if what we call negligent homicide was murder in ancient Israel. And my point being, we need to have a different, if we're representing the Lord, we need to have a different view toward life than many people do. The classic for me is the fact that the law never authorizes violent action to protect property. If someone is stealing your TV, you do not have the right to shoot them, according to biblical law. You don't have the right to kill them. Now, if they're breaking into your house, that means your life is at risk, your wife's life, or your children's lives are. Then maybe, then you can defend yourself. The law does deal with that elsewhere. We may run into it. I've forgotten what's in this chapter, the next one. But the point is, you can't. You have to say, why is that? Oh, why can't I? It's my property. And the answer is, that's right. It's property. It's a thing, and there is no thing on earth that is anywhere as valuable as one human being, the slimiest piece of human garbage that exists, is more valuable than all the things that exist on the planet, because it has a soul and a spirit in the image of God. And that's what the law says. And so we see that here. And the basic rule, you smite a man and he dies, you die. Only it's not what it says. It says, he who smites a man and he dies shall surely be put to death. And notice, it's a condition, there is a circumstance here, but there's no debating the situation. Well, if this happens and that happens, and no. It's a simple fact. Now, there is a conditional situation. It says, now, wait a minute. Wa asher lo tzara, wa Elohim imna layado, wa samti lacha makom asher yanus shama. Now, to fully appreciate what's being said here, you have to go over to the book of Numbers. But this, we're not going to do that. We're going to stick with what we've got in front of us. It says, now, and I'm going to translate this, but he who, this is a relative pronoun here, introducing a relative clause being used as a noun, he who does not lie in wait, or did not lie in wait, because it's a perfect, but God delivered him, or literally it's allowed to happen into his hands. In other words, if it was a true accident, there was no violence, there was no animosity, there was no anger. The image I always use is guys building a wall, one's up, one's down, and your hand slips and the rock falls and hits the guy in the head. You weren't trying to hit him, you weren't being negligent, you just had a mistake, you had an accident, your hand slipped. But it hit him in the head and killed him. You are guilty of killing a man, but it wasn't intentional. And that's the issue here. When it's a pure accident, no animosity. Not, if you were pretending that you were friendly and you killed him, it doesn't count. No, we'll see that in the next one. He says, now, for the one who does not lie in wait, but God allows the death to happen, allows him to fall into his hands, and then the Lord speaks as Washamti, above consecutive perfect. This is a future sense here. Washamti, I should say, Lacha Makom Asher Yanus Shama. I will set or establish for you a place where which he may flee there. A place where he may flee. These are the cities of refuge. When you got there, when we get to Numbers, the rule was when you got there, you had to have a trial. And they would establish whether or not you really were, it really was an innocent accident or whether you genuinely did it. But notice, when you got there, just to update the situation, when you got there, you got life imprisonment. You were required to stay in the surroundings of the city, the environs of the city of refuge. Outside every city was a region that would be kind of the city limits outside the walls. And you had to stay within those city limits for the rest of the life of the high priest. You better hope that the high priest didn't just turn 35. Maybe if he turned to 70, you were in pretty good shape. You only had to stay a few weeks, maybe a year. But the point was, why? Because even though it was a pure accident, a life has been taken. It's not nothing. We need to have a much better view of life than we do. I'm appalled sometimes the way I've seen good Christians, from our point of view, people who really seem to be committed to the Lord, and yet have such a callous view toward the deaths of people. Perhaps the situation of the coronavirus will surface some of that and help us to weed it out. But whatever, that's the point of this commandment, is to say, look, even if you didn't intend to kill, if there was animosity, if there was violence, you're guilty of murder. And if it was a pure accident without any animosity whatsoever, it's still a big deal. You have to flee to the city of refuge. You can't just say, you're forgiven. It's okay. It's never okay because a person died. Life matters. We have another if now, verse 14. Waki yazid ish al re'ehu laharago ba'orma. That's a short O there. Orma. Now, and I don't want to translate this but or and because it really has a certain amount of contrast. So we're going to say, and if a man acts treacherously, he conspires, as it were. He acts treacherously against his neighbor to kill him by cunning. Now, see, we just said, if it's a pure accident, so it goes, and if a man decides, okay, I'll make it look like it's a pure accident. Because if that's happening, this guy figures out he's going to commit a murder and make it look like an accident so he won't have to die for it. He says, if that's true, notice what he says. Me'im mizbachi tika chenu lamut. The nu on the end here is the third masculine singular pronoun. And he says, from my altar you shall take him to death. And he says he commits this cunning murder. He says, and then he flees to the temple and grabs a hold of the altar. I'm looking for security. He says, I don't care. Go take him. You go in and apprehend that murderer, even if he's hiding in the holy precincts of the temple. From my altar. That would be the brazen altar. Wow. In other words, there is no escape. There is no excuse. There is no way to get away from committing this kind of a murder. Umeche aviv wa imo mot yamut. All right, we see the makeh again. That we know that's a hifil participle, masculine singular, of nakah, to smite. So this is he who smites his father and his mother shall surely be put to death. Shall absolutely be no debate, no appeals, no extenuating circumstances. Just, you punch your dad, you die. You shove your mom, you die. Why? Well, remember, it's the same reason that the fifth commandment is honor your father and your mother. Parents are important. Parents stand as accountable to God and representing God in terms of their children. And no child is allowed to show contempt for his parents because it also shows contempt for God. Seriously. Okay. Verse 16. I was looking for it, and here it is. Wa gonev ish u makaro unimsa bayaro mot yamut. And this is the same construction. This is a cal-active participle of the verb ganav, which means to steal. So this is, and one stealing a man and selling him, and it is found in his hand. That is, he sells it, and he has sells the man, and they find him with the what's the word I want? The money, anyway, that he got for selling it. He says, you should surely die. You can't do that to a human being. That's interesting. What causes you to lose your life? Well, murder, killing a man, that's capital punishment. And then it says, if you try to fake it, it becomes more serious, but you're going to die there too. And then you hit your parents, you die. You steal, you kidnap a man, you die. What do all these things have in common? It is, I am abusing another person. And especially when I take their lives or take their freedom against their will. Remember, a slave, we saw, can choose to stay a slave. And that's the only way he can stay a slave, a Hebrew slave. But you can't steal a man and sell him into slavery. That's a capital offense. It's interesting, 2 out of the 3 for our country, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the original, which probably is what they meant by the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and property. But the Hebrew Bible makes a very clear distinction. Life and liberty, another person's life, another person's liberty, those are so valuable that violating them is a death penalty matter. Property doesn't even measure up. What if I steal somebody else's goods and I'm caught? What happens? Well, some countries, they cut off your hand. Some places, they kill you. Some Americans, I know, even some Christian Americans talk about how I'd gun a guy down, and drag him back and stick him in the door of my house and say he tried to break in. He's not going to take my TV. He's not going to get away with my car. He's not going to... Oh, wait a minute. No. Life and liberty, those matter. Property, what happens in Israel? Well, you pay back with interest, big interest. You steal 1 sheep, you have to pay back 5. But the point is, we're learning values. What matters? Humans that matter. Things matter less. All right, finally, verse 17. Finally, on this slide, verse 17. U machalel iwi wa imon mot yamut. Now, kalal, you might look that up. It's interesting. It's usually translated curses. And it is a curse, but it's a special kind of curse. It's not like a rar where I pray for God's curse on someone. Let's see, I want kalal. Kofule lama lama. When I pray, that's what arar means. Ayin resh, aleph resh resh. That verb has the idea of wishing them harm, wishing them and praying that something bad would happen to them. But this has a different meaning. Kalal. Let me see if I can find you here. Oh, look, it's got a big, long section. I wonder why. In the kal, it means to be small. But this isn't the kal. Notice, main prefix, this is a participle. It has a schwa patak dagish. Schwa patak dagish. We don't need to be looking at the kal. We need to be looking at the pal. And what's the pal of this? Where are we? All right, down here. All right. He says to declare accursed. That's what this translation, this lexicon says. But go back to the original sense, the kal sense, the basic sense, to be small or of no account. And that's what this word is talking about. To declare somebody insignificant and worthless. He says, you say your parents don't matter, you die. You treat your parents as inferiors. You treat your parents with insolent disrespect. You die. Notice we're learning. This is the law. Yes, it's the law of the land. It tells how to handle specific cases. But it's doing something else. It's teaching us a value system. How, in God's eyes, we should value things. So if you want to translate it as he who curses his father and his mother, yeah, okay. But it really means he who belittles them. And it's not so much he belittles them by saying bad things about them. He treats them as unimportant. It's the exact opposite of honoring. Honoring your parents says they are important. Remember, the Hebrew word for honor is kaved. It means heavy. It comes from a root which means to be heavy. It says, when you honor your parents, you make them heavy. You treat them as heavy. And that's the images of a scale. And they're way down here pushing it way down. They're way more important than anything or anyone else around. And he says, no, in your case, Kalel goes this way. Anything on this side is more important than my dad and mom. And that's why I say it's interesting. It is a capital offense to do that in Israel. Why? Because again, parents matter. And how you treat your parents is a reflection on your attitude toward God. I know what we say. We say, oh, but you don't, my parents, oh, it's awful. It's like, no. You don't show respect for your parents, then you've missed it. And I'm horrified at the number of young people, not so much in the Church of Jesus Christ that I hang around with anyway, but in our culture, how many young people flagrantly kalel their parents. Treat them as stupid ignoramuses who should be ignored, and whose opinion and whose honor is irrelevant to them. All right, now we come to verse 18. I think we'll finish with this stuff here. We get another key. Ki yarivun and ashim. Wahika, there's our naka again, the hifil. Wahika ish et re'ehu ba even o ba egrof, walo yamut, wanafal la, pardon me, la mish kav. All right, this entire phrase, this entire verse, is a protasis that's unresolved. It doesn't have an apotheosis. It doesn't have a then. If. It says, and if men are struggling, men are contending, they're fighting, and a man hits or strikes, smites, if you like King James, his friend or his neighbor, his companion, the guy he's fighting with a stone or with his fist, or with a stone or with a fist. Now I think the idea here is it doesn't matter. It says if he has a weapon, he doesn't have a weapon. If he smites him, and the man does not die. Now we just had if you hit somebody in a fight and he dies, here's how you die. What if you hit somebody and he doesn't die? But instead, وَنَفَالْ لَمِشْكَافْ. But he falls into bed. You know, see, he's injured, he's not killed. He's now in bed. He says, all right. What are we going to talk about? He says, okay, so the man didn't die. You beat him up and he didn't die, but he is so injured that he can't function. He has to stay in bed. Now we continue with an im. Im, because there are two possibilities. He may get worse and still die, in which case you die. What if he does? What if he gets better? Okay, that's verse 19. Im yakum, if he arises, wahith halech. And here at the hithpael of the verb halak, which means to walk. And hith halek means to walk around. Halak, most of the time you'll find that lexicons translate both of these as walk. And to be honest, that probably works. We're kind of stuck. But they don't mean the same thing, even though we translate them the same way. When I walk, halak, I walk from point A to point B. I'm traveling. I'm making. I walk over and I pick up something and I come back. I walk. When I hit halak, I walk around. The focus is not on me going somewhere. It's upon the action of walking. That's all. You would never say, if he hit halaks to town. No. Because you're not walking anywhere, you're just walking. It's focusing on the action itself. And that's what's happening here. It's very clear in this case. It says, if he arises, and he's able to walk in the street. That is, he's not working his way around his house on a piece of furniture. He's able to go out in the open air, on the open street, and get along on his staff or a crutch. In other words, I'm not saying he has to be fully ambulatory, but he has, if he gets well enough that he can go out and function again. That's the situation. And now we have the then. And notice, we've had and now we have the then. Waneka, ha, makeh. All right, makeh is the smiter. Remember, the one who smites. Rak is only. We'll get that in a moment. Here's the division here. The smiter is innocent. Not, or is declared innocent. He's not innocent in the sense of, this is a PL from the Ka. He is not innocent in the sense that he didn't do anything wrong. Although the idea is that these men were fighting, they were both doing something wrong, and this guy just, and the guy that's injured got the poorer end of the deal, you know. He just was unlucky. But his point is, this man can't be punished for attempted murder or something. What is the punishment? What are the consequences? Rak, shifto, yatain, only shuv, his return he will give, and he is fully healed, which is awkward to translate, but the sense is pretty straightforward. He says he only has to pay for the cost of the man's recovery until he's fully restored. In other words, if he can't work, then you have to pay to hire someone to do his job. If he can't go out and to the market and buy food, then you have to provide him with food. You have to undo the damage that you did. That's the requirement. But you don't have to die. You don't have to, there's no price paid here. This is a matter of simple justice. You guys were fighting. He got the poor end of the deal. You're the cause. Why? Because other people matter and you're responsible to protect them, even in a fight. Values, very different than the values that exist in our culture. How many times on television do we get to see people blown away or beaten bloody, and and we're supposed to feel good about it because they're bad people, where the Bible won't let us feel good about it. It says no. So here, you're not a murderer, not even an attempted murderer, but you do owe him. This is really the background to the whole idea of personal injury law in our culture. It goes back to the biblical concept that a person who causes the injury of another person is responsible to reimburse him for his loss. It wasn't something invented by Blackstone or by the Goths or the Anglo-Saxons in their law or Roman law. God's word. Verse 20. וכי יכה איש את עבדו או את אמתו בשבט ומת תחת ידו, נקום ינקה. All right, this is a very interesting one. I shouldn't have gotten here because I'm not sure I'm ready to discuss it. But anyway, and if a man hits or strikes his male servant or his female servant with a stick and that person dies under his hand, nakom ya nakem. What's nakom? What's nakam? The idea is a punishment. Now this is going to be really uncomfortable because it comes down to the difference between someone who is a freeman and someone who is a slave. As I said, that's why I'm not thrilled with talking about it, but it's here. Nakam says, take vengeance or revenge. He shall surely be avenged. The point here is, and it's a debate. Some would say that means that the slave, you kill your slave, you're beating your slave because he's misbehaved, and you beat him and he dies, then you die too. However, if that was the case, why didn't he just say so? I mean, he said so over and over again up to this point. He shall surely die, he shall surely die, he shall surely die. He should be taken even from my altar to death. Here he doesn't mention death. Here he uses a word which means to be avenged. He shall thoroughly or fully be avenged. And that's the debate. What constitutes thorough avenging? And I like avenge rather than revenge. Striking the balance. And you say, this is a tough one. It suggests that there is a difference in the punishment which comes when a slave owner kills his slave than when he kills somebody else. Now, in other places, that doesn't seem to, there seems to be something else. So it may be that this is just another way of saying, the crucial point is, he can't, whatever this means, and that's what I'm going to live with right now, even though I haven't got as full an answer as I should for you, and I apologize. But whatever else this means, it's saying that the death of a slave cannot be just dismissed as, a financial loss. Well, I paid $100 for him, and now I've beaten him to death, and I only got 3 years out of him. Well, I've lost some money on the deal. I guess that's it. No. This is not a piece of equipment that broke down. This is a human being that was killed. There must be judicial consequences. That's the idea of this word nakam. There's some sort of judicial consequences, whether those are execution or heavy fines or I don't know. The text is not as clear as I wish it were, and I haven't looked and worked through this issue as far as I should have before I started this class. But the point is, whatever else is going on, it's saying a slave is a person, and his death cannot be just written off as insignificant or unimportant. Ach, im yom o yomayim, pardon me, ya'amod lo yakum ki kaspo hu. Now this af-im, af is what am I looking at? Verse 21. I'm looking at, yeah, that's where it was. But if, I guess af has to be but if a day or two, notice dual, yamayim, if 1 or 2 days he stands up Now, literally, it says you will not rise. But this has to be, it looks like kum, but it's actually nakam again. Yukam. He will not be punished because his kesef, which means silver, is he. He's his property. And that's why I said this. It recognizes that a slave is in a strange position in ancient Israel. As has already been established by 2 or 3 of these laws that we've looked at, a slave is a human being and cannot be ignored, and his humanity cannot be ignored. On the other hand, a slave is also a piece of property. And somehow they have to be both. He has to be both. And says, so if he dies, you get punished for the damage you did to a human being. If he lives, then he doesn't get punished because it was his property. I don't fully, I'm trapped by my modern worldview, my modern perspective on this one. I'm uncomfortable with it. I think the point we have to deal with, however, is the point, whatever else is going on, the issue is justice. That if someone is, we don't like it because we say no human being can be property, but in Israel that was allowed. It was allowed in Israel, it was allowed in the Arab states, it was allowed in Rome and Greece, much more so than ever in Israel. It was allowed in the Middle Ages. It was allowed in modern times up until the 1800s in the Christian world of England and the United States. And in that environment, the Lord says you can't treat a slave as just property. But he says, on the other hand, I will acknowledge it is property. Even though it's a human being, he's a human being. He is also the owner's property. And so there are some limitations to this. In this case, the idea being, I think, something on the order of a slave can't sue his master because he belongs to the master. Well, we still have verses 22 through 37. Oh, is that it? I got one more, don't I? Yeah, through 37. So look at. We only have 10 more minutes. Let me see. Is there a short? Is verse 22 short? No, it is not. So we'll come back next time, and we'll talk about what is really one of the is the unique law in terms of criminal law in the law of Moses. What if 2 men are fighting and a woman grabs a hold of one man's genitals to help the other man win? And the answer is you cut off her hand. It's the only time in the law of Moses that you have mutilation authorized. And the question is why? Well, we'll have to wait 2 weeks to find out, won't we? Thank you for putting up with us. I'm letting you get about 10 minutes extra time. I hope you appreciate it, but it's spring break and I'm willing to break too. In fact, I'm about to break. You don't want me watching. You don't want to watch me break. So anyway, thank you so much for paying attention to this time. I'll try to get things set up and make things smoother. And hopefully when we come back from break, I'll have a better way of teaching this class online, or at least a more useful way of doing it. Thank you. We'll see you later.